Morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning. Any questions before we get started? Good so far? All right. I want to review some of what we talked about yesterday and practice some concepts. So I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to walk through a few of the things we talked about, and you can see if you have questions about it. Okay, so as a reminder, you can go to your My App page and go to Holman Library, right? You're doing your research. Today, we're going to review the research guides again. So under library help, we talked about yesterday what makes fake news, right? If you're not at the library looking at the databases, you need to consider the source, maybe look at what other people are saying about the article, if they're dissenting opinions, make sure it's current and not taken out of context or another date, make sure it's not satire, okay? Check your biases, right? Especially if it conforms with what you believe, question it even more intensely. It's just human nature. We like things that agree with us, right? News databases, right? These are some that you are considered more trustworthy and can gather credible information. We went over the websites yesterday that you can use to check facts. If you get a crazy story that runs across your social media, before you believe it, right? You can check PolitiFact or Snopes, factcheck.org, okay, Open Secrets. So all these are excellent resources. We check the domain and the URL, right? If it's non-standard, ABC News. So if you go to, let's go to abcnews.com.co, which is a non-standard website. Let's see, military police advisors, Wade deploying heat ray against DC protesters. ICE practically deported immigrant woman who says she got negative surgery while detained. Negative surgery? I'm not sure who they have writing their headlines. But this does not look like abc.com, does it? They are just kind of spoofing or faking the headline. You can probably tell that it doesn't look like. Employees with disabilities can make only $3.34 an hour. So it doesn't look like the stories are illegitimate, but you still need to know that they are not who they're purporting to be. So if we look at the actual website for ABC News, There's a lot more information. Pictures, the layout's different. So just be aware. Make sure you check that URL to see if it's a .com or if it has some added information on there or spoofing a site. Quotes too, you have to look up, sometimes they'll take quotes out of context. So they'll say, you know, the person said this, only they said it about something else 5 years ago, right? And it sounds terrible when they're talking about the new event, when it sounded reasonable talking about whatever they were talking about at the time. Or maybe not reasonable, but they clearly were taking it out of a different context. Like, look at the comments to see if anybody's saying, hey, this doesn't make sense or this isn't accurate, and the reverse image search. If they're presenting weird images, which I've seen, trying to sensationalize something. Does anybody have any questions about that? Do you feel comfortable identifying sort of suspicious news? How do you feel about telling fake news from real news? Are you confident? Emmeline, what do you think? Cole, you're good? I mean, it's tricky because we're all busy, right? And sometimes it takes more energy to investigate something. But you're not that confident, Janie? Tell me what concerns you about it, because then maybe I can help you out. Is it because there's so much information out there? Sometimes I feel flooded with information. I don't know about you guys. Your best weapon is a critical mind. Question everything. I mean, it's unfortunate that it has to be that way. And then one thing that you can do is come up with some websites that you trust, right? So are there some news sources that you consider more trustworthy? I mean, they all make mistakes. You got to cut them some slack. They're human beings. But if most of the time they're doing their best to be accurate and represent what's really happening, you know, then you go to those reliable sites to check, and then you don't have to like try to investigate everything around the story. Does that make sense? So, and also I would suggest having more than one, so you can cross check. Find a couple reliable news sites. So my favorites are NPR, which is National Public Radio, which is basically like public television, only it's public radio. And then I like to go outside the country to BBC America, but that's just me. Or BBC, actually, not America, because that I think still has a little bit of influence from American reporters. What I want is sort of an outside view of what's going on in America. So like, there's a lot of controversy about how we're handling the pandemic. So if I go to another English-speaking website that is not our country, and they don't they're all going to be sort of influenced by politics, but they are less influenced if they are from another country, like England. It runs BBC, that's British Broadcasting. Yes, the sources that you're using for the annotated bibliography should relate to the topic that you're doing for your papers. Yes. Good question. Look for sources related to the topic of your paper. But as far, Janie is not feeling confident, if you have a couple go-to websites that you trust to tell you the truth most of the time, like 99% of the time, unless they make a mistake and sometimes they may have to retract something, then if they're not reporting that story, that's kind of a red flag. If like this one news story is only reported at this one site, of course they might be breaking a story, but if nothing appears after a day or so, you have to suspect that perhaps it's not as true as they're saying, perhaps. So that would be my suggestion. If you feel like I do sometimes overwhelmed by all of the information and noise out there, is have a few websites that you go to that you can cross-check. I mean, 3 would be better even. And I will go to sites also that I know are biased to see what kind of take that they have on it, just so I can kind of get all sides. But you may not have all the time that I do to look into information like that. So have a couple go-tos that you know are pretty reliable. You've checked them out. They seem to be trying their best. They really legitimately are trying to report news as opposed to spinning something or propaganda. Lizzie, scholarly sources. Good, we'll talk about this. Let's review popular versus scholarly sources. The scholarly sources are still related to your topic, right? All the sources that you're looking for your annotated bibliography should possibly be useful to writing about your topic, okay? 2 of them being scholarly means they're a certain type of source related to your topic. So let's look at what makes a scholarly versus a popular source again. So for that, we go back to the library guides. And just to show you again, let me go back to the beginning. Where am I at? I'm under the research guides right here under help. So if I click on those, if I want the fake news information, I go to library help. If I want the information on scholarly sources, I go to English, which is, you know, our subject, and I go to English composition. And if you go over to finding sources, using sources, hopefully you got to watch this short little bit. It's only 3-minute long video. I'm not sure why my audio was not working yesterday. But a scholarly source is considered a better quality source because it's written by an expert in a field. It usually has the original research that's been done. It's more rigorous in terms of explaining how they did the research, what the results were, and drawing on other credible research. Remember, how do you spot which is? Well, the library, for one, will identify academic. Scholarly sources are also called academic sources. So if you see that term is used interchangeably. Scholarly sources tend to be long and very full of scientific terminology and jargon, and the titles are long, okay? It's an in-depth discussion of original research or emerging issues that's written by an expert in the field for other experts, okay? And we have to kind of do some interpretation, okay? Many of them are peer-reviewed, which means before they even get published, a bunch of people who are in the same field read it and go, there's a problem with this here that you need to fix, or you need to explain this better, or okay, it looks good. It looks like you did everything you need to do to really explore this topic and cross all your T's and dot all your I's. Specialized language. Now, popular sources are what you guys might be more familiar with, which is just stuff that's written for everyone, not necessarily by an expert, but by a reporter who might be an expert in the field, like a technology reporter or a medical reporter. So they're not necessarily an expert on cloning, if they write about medicine, they have some expertise. Maybe they're a doctor, but not necessarily a specialist. And they're trying to summarize the issue for a general audience instead of talking to experts. They're talking to us. So the language is more user-friendly. It's written by the journalist. It's reviewed by an editor, but not necessarily people who are experts in the subject. It is more user-friendly to read, but it tends to have less fact-checking. It has some. Often has photos and images, which scholarly sources generally do not. They might have charts and graphs and things that project data and results. Okay. So the reason I'm asking for at least 2 scholarly sources is because these are the best quality sources. But generally, you can't just use scholarly sources. There aren't usually enough of them. And also, there's some valuable things in the popular sources too. Like when you appeal to an audience, we're going to start talking about this tomorrow, is you appeal to their intellect, right? That would be the scholarly part. You use the expert information, the sources, but you also want to appeal to their emotions. And the popular sources tend to have interviews, stories, informal, reads like a story. They have things that kind of engage our emotions more and show how the topic relates to people in general. Does that make sense in terms of why I'm asking for scholarly sources? Lizzie? Both the popular and the scholarly source would be on your topic. They're just different kinds of sources. Like one would be a book and one would be a magazine. A couple would be scholarly and the rest might be popular. You can use more than 2. The first draft is due on Monday. Sure. So for Monday, I'm looking for roughly 3 pages. You introduce what the controversy is. So you may have an introduction technique that says, in 2000, I'm going to make some of this up, so I don't know. 2012, the Dreamers Act was introduced by President Obama. And that's the act that allows kids who are brought here illegally by their parents to attend school, even though they're illegal immigrants. And then just give us a little background on the issue. But people disagree about whether this should be allowed. So you say, here are what proponents of the law, the Dreamers Act say, and here are what opponents of the Dreamers Act say. And that's the goal of the next paper, is to explain both sides of the issue. So in the assignment sheet that I went over yesterday, I gave you guys a couple options for organizing it, block or point by point. Point by point is kind of head to head. So many proponents of the Dreamers Act believe that it adds to professions that we desperately need, like healthcare. We need a lot of nurses and healthcare workers. We've been short. So if we allow kids who didn't commit a crime, they were brought here by their parents, right? If we allow them to go to school, educated people usually contribute more to society. They can become nurses, which we need, and then on the other side, you can have the arguments that the other side has against that, they're not going into the professions we need or whatever evidence the other side. So that would be taking the 2 points head to head. Okay. So that's what I'm looking for, is like that you know the issue, and then you can cite the sources that help you explain it. Okay. So maybe you tell me, well, this person disagrees with the act, and then you quote them. So we're going to talk more about how to do that as we go from the first draft to the final draft. Good question. Let me show you. Okay, Fabian, welcome back. let's go over the assignment again, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. When you're comparing and contrasting two things, there are two ways of organizing it. Let me open up a document so I can kind of show you. One sec. Let's look at the assignment. All right, let me share this screen again. One sec. Okay, so I'm in Brightspace, I'm under assignments. So this is the first draft of the comparison of your research topic information. It's due on Monday. So here's what I mean. I have an example inside the assignment. This is the free college. So the research question is, free college beneficial to low income students? Intro techniques. And then I sort of explain the overview. Advocates believe free college is beneficial for students from low-income families because the other side argues that it is not for these reasons. Okay. So here, the block organization means you tell me all the reasons free college is good for low-income students. Okay. And then after you finish that, you go to all the reasons that free college is not beneficial to low-income students. So you have one block that explains all the reasons for, and one block that explains all the reasons against. Okay? So that's one potential way. If you have a lot of criteria, if you have three, probably if you have more than three, you probably want to do point by point, which means here's a reason for free college, here's the reason against that the other side argues. So this is like directly head-to-head comparing one reason for and the reason against it, the other side argues. One reason for, one reason against. One reason for, one reason against. You guys follow me? So while this is a block of information, all for, a block against, this is going back and forth. For, against, for, against. If this works best if you have direct contradictions on points, like there's a point about free college that, let's say the cost, right? Both sides have opinions about the cost, so you might want to do point by point. So you can say, here are the reasons they say it will pay for itself or be more beneficial to the economy than a drawback, and then these are the reasons the other side disagree with that it will benefit the economy enough to pay for it. Does that explain? Does that explain it, Lizzie? Okay, cool. So if you have a lot of reasons that are directly one side and the other have an opinion on the same reason, you probably want to go point by point. But the assignment has examples in here, so you can kind of, you're going to have an introduction that basically summarizes the issue and gives us a little background, and then you're going to go into all the reasons for and against. Eventually, you're going to end up with at least 4 pages. So don't take a position yet. You'll be able to do that in your final research paper. Right now, you're just telling me what both sides think. Right? Sometimes it's hard for people to do this. Like your opinions will kind of creep in. Just, you can give me your opinion later, avoid it right now. Okay. So again, we have scholarly versus popular sources, and ideally the more scholarly sources you can get, the better, because they're considered higher quality sources. Go back to here. Again, you have the handy dandy charts. Here's, if you don't find in the database how to cite sources, here are some resources that you can use for citing sources. Again, I also recommend the Purdue OWL. It also has the basic information if you're just like still feeling uncomfortable with doing the research. Here's the one these are the two that we've worked with so far, right? Google Scholar, okay? Sometimes if you're not sure about a source too, you're not confident that's a legitimate source, you can check with the librarian. They have some ebooks as well. For these topics, it can be a little bit harder to find books, but do look, because books have a different perspective. They have a longer term view. So while articles are nice and immediate and you can get some quick information and a hot take on something, books can kind of look back over the entire history because it takes longer to write a book than it does to pop off an article in a week. They're both, each have their advantages. But if for a book, you're not going to find a topic on your book. If you've appropriately narrowed down your topic, you need to look inside the book at different chapters to see if any of the chapters address your issue and have valuable information on it. Okay, so this one is under English composition, where you start research. But again, all of these are under the research guides. And you can always chat with the librarian. Okay. There's also a resource they have for helping you with government documents. So if you need some information about statistics, they're doing the census right now. I don't think they've got it all collated yet, but they've recently put it online. So eventually it'll have really good information on populations, densities, you know, is the state becoming more diverse? The census will be able to show things like that. Okay, are you feeling hopefully a little better about identifying fake news and sources? What do you mean a website, Jeannie? I mean, you're going to need at least, for this paper, you'll need at least 5 sources that are different. That means they're from different perspectives written by different either people or organizations. It doesn't have to be a person or an author. But a research paper brings together various sources to say something. So you don't want to base your research paper just on one source, because it's more like a synthesis. When you synthesize something, you're basically bringing together a bunch of different things to make a point for the paper. So you want some, I mean, they can all be electronic. I mean, most things are online these days, but you can use websites, you can use people, like if you interview them, you can use, you have to use at least 2 scholarly sources for this one. And those will be by researchers at usually organizations or colleges, universities. Good questions. Anybody else have more about what sources or how to bring it all together? The first draft is really just, you know, your first shot at explaining both sides of the issue, and then we can help you tweak it and bring in the sources to support what you say. So generally, when you've researched an issue, what you'll say is, okay, proponents of the Dreamers Act say it helps fill the need in professions that need more workers, like nursing. Okay. And then how do you use the source? You bring in the source. Bring a source that shows we need nurses. Does that make sense? And then you need to show that many of the people who are dreamers may be going into that profession. Make a connection between dreamers schooling and fulfilling gaps in needed professions, like teachers. That makes sense? So you've observed one of the reasons they say, and then you look at the evidence they're using. Usually whatever evidence they're using to support what they're saying is the evidence that you need to use to show their position. That's how you use the sources to support what you're saying. So state their position, show the source information they are using to back up the position.
Okay, so what if I get like two different sources, right? But they use the same evidence, like.
Excellent question. That's not as helpful, right? Because generally we'd like multiple pieces of information that say roughly the same thing. So those two sources, if they're basing it on the same evidence, may not be as helpful unless one of them maybe has a really good quote that you can use to summarize something or something other valuable about it. But yeah, you probably want to keep looking if both of those sources are basing it on the same information. And that's tricky because a lot of news organizations like ABC and NBC, they're all going to pull from a lot of similar information, right? So that's where the scholarly information can come in. Maybe they're citing a research study and you can go find the original research study and also look at what they're using as resources and see if maybe they have more information in different sources.
Okay.
Does that make sense? They serve as a guide to other sources on similar topics.
Okay.
Yeah, that is an excellent question, Jason, because a lot of the news stories pull on the same types of sources. So it can be tricky to find more than one that supports what somebody's saying. But that's kind of how you layer it. So if you're doing the point by point, you have what the proponents think and the evidence they're using to support their position, and what the opponents think and what the evidence they're using to support it. And sometimes you have to explain the evidence. I might look at the very same evidence and come to a totally different conclusion than you would if we have different views of the world, right? Same thing when the debates are going on, the presidential debates. One person's going to look at it and feel their candidate did really well, and the other person's going to look and totally disagree and say their candidate won, clearly. That's because we look at the world in different ways. So if you're going to explain why your candidate won the debate, you have to tell me why. So when you're looking at the evidence they're using, you have to show me how they're analyzing it. So they're saying this shows that a lot of the dreamers are going into valuable professions like first responders and nursing. So don't forget that section where you explain the evidence. So it's like layers. It's what they think, the evidence that led them to think it, and then the explanation of that evidence. Okay? So that's kind of what you're going to be doing in each section of the paper. They think it's really valuable to send dreamers to school. Here are some reasons why. Here's the significance of that evidence and how it supports their position. That's your job as the writer of the paper, is to bring it all together show us the evidence, and explain what it means and how it supports what they're saying. We're going to get more into this and more into examples too, between the first draft. First draft, you're just going to kind of get down all the information that you have on both sides. Then you may have to go back and fill in the source information. You guys are asking good questions. Anybody else? How comfortable is everybody with summarizing? A summary is basically putting in your own words a condensed version of the original. So when we looked at the sources and you look at the abstract for a scholarly article, the abstract is what summarizes basically what is in the article. So don't just copy and paste the abstract, but what you're basically going to do is translate it into your own words, right? So this article studies whether later practice times can help people who can help sports teams perform better. So, because I know a lot of coaches start their practices at like 5 a.m. before everybody goes to class. So maybe they've done a study that shows, is it better for teams to practice at 5 a.m. or is it better for them to practice like later in the day or in the evening? So they could look at middle of the day, they could look at end of the day, and look at the effect that something like sleep has on practice times. Okay, so then you just summarize it. You say, this article researches whether changing practice times can be beneficial to team performance, and evidence shows that later practices can have a beneficial effect. So whatever it is that the article concludes. You just give me like a couple sentences that summarize it in your words. It can be tricky, you know, basically you're looking at the abstract and summarizing what it is that they're saying. So that's part of what you're doing for the annotated bib for tomorrow. This is what the article is about and what it essentially says. Okay. Even if it's a popular source, this article discusses the effect that driverless cars may have on our economy in the future and concludes that it will vastly change the way that we work. Question about summarizing? Are you feeling good about it? And then don't forget that extra sentence that says, I picked this source because it will help me support or show their support for their argument, or it will help me show background information, or it has a great quote I can use to get people's attention for my intro, or it has good sources in its citations that I can use. Tell me why you thought it might be useful, essentially. All right, we're down to less than a minute. I'm going to open up another session and anybody can come back and ask questions. If you want to help narrowing down your topic or anything else we talked about, you can come back. Otherwise, I'll let you start working on the bibliography. And I'll be here till 8:50.